If we don't get smart quickly, China will destroy our country.
I don't want from China, but you almost have to buy from China. It's ridiculous.
China is draining our wealth. The Chinese do not respect us.
One thing I can tell you, China won't be ripping us, Japan won't be ripping us, Mexico will not be ripping off this country like they're doing right now.
Donald Trump has warned us about China before, and after today's China-driven sell-off, he's saying it's time for America to get smart. Moneyman Larry Glazer agrees. Larry, first of all, who's to blame for this? If they do have this kind of power over us, how did that start? Who gets the blame for it?
Sure, Stuart. Well, you know, there's an old expression, and we certainly gave the keys to the kingdom to China, but at the same time, we always want to be careful and be mindful of the kindness of strangers. And in this case, those strangers are China. Look, did China exploit the weakness in the U.S. economy and take advantage of the American worker? Absolutely. But if you want to blame someone for the problems that we're dealing with in this country, don't look at China. Look at our own government right there in Washington, D.C., who sold us down the river with policies that enabled China to exploit us, with reckless and runaway debt that allowed China to become one of our largest holders of debt and hold the keys to the kingdom. That's how we got in the situation.
Yes, but you can't just break that tie just like that. As you mentioned, they hold an enormous amount of our debt. I think it's getting close to $1 trillion of our debt. If they were to sell it, down goes our market, down goes a lot of things. You can't just break it just like that, now can you?
No, you can't. And look, it is no wonder that outsiders are leading in the polls, that American voters and American workers are frustrated with this situation. Look, Stuart, we are sick and tired of being punching bags to special interests. This is just another special interest in the case of China that's taken hold of our economy because of decades of neglect, decades of failed policies.
Larry, I see it. I understand what you're saying. But Trump is saying, end that break. Quit letting them have power over us. But that's a lot easier said than done when they're holding all of this debt.
Yes, that's right, Stuart. Look, they hold the cards right now. And because of our reckless and runaway drunken sailor spending, we're not in a position to do that. With the proper leadership, with the proper policies, we can break free of that debt. It is not that simple. And Donald Trump knows that. Look, we know we can change the tide. We know we can change those policies. But right now, China is in a position of strength, and our own politicians have put them there, and they've put the American worker in a position of weakness. And the American voter needs to make a change, and a change in those policies to give us the strength to break free of those reins right now.
Larry Glazer, we hear you again. Thank you very much indeed. Larry Glazer, everyone.
My pleasure.
Thanks. All right. How do people on Main Street feel about today's massive sell-off? All right, take a listen.
I think that, you know, with 401k, and that's my main concern. You know, there is some worry there.
Corrections in store, and that's what's happening.
I'm not nervous about it. Actually, I bought today, so I think it's a great time to buy.
I'm very disappointed. I think that it's being manipulated terribly, and I think we should all be a little scared.
Okay, we should all be a little scared. I heard that. To Fox Business Network's Trish Regan in New York. Trish, I didn't hear any panic there.
Yeah, you know, I think I would say overall, Stuart, a lot of investors have disengaged themselves to a certain extent from this market. We didn't see a lot of sort of your mom and pop investors jumping back in. They've been so fearful ever since, of course, 2008 and the flash crash that followed. However, it is important to note that volatility is making a return. We saw this demonstrated by the VIX, the so-called fear gauge today, which spiked considerably. And overall, you're seeing some sentiment in the market right now that indicates people are growing worried. I think for some time, and I've heard this from investor after investor, I even heard this from Alan Greenspan, there's some concern out there that we are in a Fed-induced asset bubble, meaning the Federal Reserve kept rates so low for so long, they pumped so much money into the system, Stuart, that valuations just kept getting higher and higher and higher. So you had the market running up. Simultaneously, the economy was basically doing nothing. So you've got 2% growth and a market that's on fire. Somehow the two don't add up.
Is this a perfect storm? Problems with the Fed pumping out all of that money, keeping interest rates low for a long time, China on the brink, and an economic policy which, as you say, has only produced 2% growth. Perfect storm?
I think it's a perfect storm for a market sell-off. I don't know if it's a perfect storm for a full-on systemic crisis a la 2008. If this, in fact, turns into a debt crisis, then you get a real problem on your hands. And there are people that are saying it could be problematic because of emerging markets, places like China and elsewhere that are dependent on, Latin America, for example, on commodities. If, in fact, they suffer so much because oil prices come down so much, then, in turn, we could have a real problem on our hands. But as for today, and as for this week, it looks like right now it is just a market sell-off. Let's hope, Stuart, that it's contained at simply that.
We'll take that. Trish Regan, thanks very much. Don't forget, you can catch Trish every day on the Fox Business Network when she hosts the Intelligence Report. That is 2 p.m. Eastern. All right, if you are Joe Biden thinking of jumping in, are you looking at this and staying out? And stocks clearly down today. Charlie Gasparino fed up, who he says is to blame for this. Here he comes.